Good evening and welcome to episode number 4 of Sunday at the Inn. Tonight we are absolutely honoured to have with us, and I would like to say that this is the best guest that we've had so far, but to be honest with you, everyone's just been amazing so far. So, I just see this as just exponentially just getting better and better as episodes go on. So that's fantastic. So tonight we are absolutely honoured to have with us former MI5, currently the editor of the UK column, which is a dissident news outlet, and he's a fantastic man, and we're so honoured to have him here. This is Alex Thomson. We'll bring him in right now.
Good evening, and thank you very much for the introduction there, Joe. Just to apologise in advance to the viewers and listeners if my connection from this far-off land where I'm currently residing for a couple of weeks doesn't live up to the billing, but thank you very much for that. One small thing, it was GCHQ, which does fairly similar work to MI5, but I was in the electronics espionage department, which is in Chelsea.
Very cool. Very cool. I would really like to talk more about this. It's such an interesting part of your sort of career life that we're fascinated to sort of delve into. To my left is our second host, which is Richard Lumby. Richard Lumby, welcome to the bar.
Yeah, cheers, Joe. And I've been looking forward to this one, Alex. As soon as your name came up in the thing, I said, yeah, I'd like to be on that show. So I'm really looking forward to tonight.
Thank you for that, Richard, and I do appreciate the cross necklace that you've got. It looks Celtic in design.
It is Celtic, yeah. I was raised a Catholic, but I just would generically call myself a Christian.
In the New Testament too.
Fantastic. Well, I mean, this is one of the things that I kind of wanted to dive right into with you, Alex, really, because I'm not a practicing Christian. I follow a different faith, but I do see the absolute value in the Christian faith. It's the moral foundation of our law, of almost every system that we behold. It is the baseline of everything. So I do see the importance of it, and I respect it a lot. And I've just been noticing a lot recently that, well, my argument since getting involved with the dissident action is you see the power that's, I say power, more kind of influence that you get from having an official religion behind what it is that you're trying to do. Okay. So you see a lot with Islam, the power that they sort of concede with that behind them, and the sort of the protection, the shield that they have with that is ultimately really powerful. And it's something that I saw that was massively lacking over the past sort of 5 years, but I have seen recently that there's been this really big uptake in and around the Christian faith. I always forget her name. I'm really sorry. I know her first name is Isabel, but you may well have seen the story about her, that she was arrested for silently praying outside of an abortion clinic, which is it's really tragic when you see the video and you know what happened. And I've watched quite a lot of podcasts with her afterwards, and it is really tragic the way that she's been treated when you compare this to, her name is Isabel Vaughan Spruce. Her name is, sorry, it's very,
That's
very
right. And we have covered her case a couple of times on the UK column. So if you search for Spruce, that will probably bring it up most reliably and easily on ukcolumn.org. Yeah.
I advise anyone to go over to UK column if for your news, for your true news, because it is very, very good. And the Eastern Approaches group as well on Telegram, I believe that you run that as well, don't you, Alex?
I do. It's t.me/East app, or just search for Eastern Approaches on Telegram. And it's my one-man brand, both the Eastern Approaches podcasting label, as it were, which I'm going to boost this year, which relates to the foreign parts in which I travel, and also to the fact that the Netherlands is east of Britain, of course, and I live in the Netherlands, but also the Telegram channel, which doesn't attempt to replicate UK Column as a whole, because we do have a very well-run Telegram channel of our own now, thanks to social media manager Kenny, who's come on board and who's brilliantly amplified that outreach. So it's just really my personal selection of news and things of interest, my own postings, photographs when I travel as well, not so much this time, but also observations and news from others. And the channel description there, I get told off by some people for it not being what they were expecting, but the channel description you are supposed to look at when you subscribe or consider subscribing to a Telegram channel, and mine says geopolitics, Christianity, education, and I've even forgotten myself now, just off the top of my mind, what the fourth one is, but it's there in the channel description.
Yeah, I only read it the other day, and yeah, you've got a really good solid. How do I put it? I really like your channel because everything in there is solid. It's like you don't scan over anything because you know that everything is of value. Like I almost know that if Alex Thomson pops it up, there's a reason behind that, and there's something sort of bigger at play.
Wonderful. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm aiming for. I know that for my sins, I have got some clout now among both Christian dissidents generally and nationalist dissidents more particularly, and I wish to use that responsibly. If my channel subscribers say this looks fake, I've tried my hardest not to post shocking footage because, whether it's claiming to be from Ukraine or from an ethnic bus stop in Britain or wherever, but even when it has been validated, what is the point? Unless you're quite certain of what your angle on it is. I don't want to upset people. I've got some tender souls on the channel as well, and things have settled down in my first year of running it. The people who went off in a huff because it was not Christian enough, or too Christian, not ethno-nationalist enough, or too ethno-nationalist, they've all the ones who remained have just agreed to live and let live. And I've got I would say a very classic European, I would more specifically say Christian and British historical view of what debate takes place on the channel, which is don't insult each other. We'll discuss anything, we'll make a case, and we will not insult each other. And if you start swearing on my channel, you're out. And people know that, so we've had a self-selection. So this allows me to post the stuff that you're talking about. I won't shy away from attacks on our people, and I shy away from calling our people the autochthonous, the native people of the British Isles. And I don't shy away from the Christian content either. And if you have a problem with that, you don't have to be on the channel. But this allows me to explore things more deeply. And I think I've got several centers of gravity, as it were, among the channel audience now. You've obviously got the big boomer disconcerted Christians, many of whom are severely let down by how the churches have preached globalist integration at them. But you've also got people considering Christianity from any number of angles, or just friendly outsiders to the Christian faith who just accept, like you, that without it, one of several factors, but it is the main factor, we wouldn't have had a British history.
Absolutely. I mean, it's intrinsic to everything that we know, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. We have a German writing for us right now. If you search for the crisis of Western political systems, or just one or two of those words, you will find that on ukcolumn.org. This German starts his very long and useful think piece by saying the West we knew, certainly in countries like Germany and the United Kingdom, had, I think he says, 4 founding principles. Christianity was the first, or Christendom, the idea that we're all paid up to honesty, that our rights are God-derived and absolute and non-negotiable. He names 2 or 3 others, of course, like the rule of law, which have all gone by the wayside, all big themes that we report on the UK column, but they all flow in some sense from the Christian conviction that you can't make the law up as you go along.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, this ties in very closely with something that me and Rich have been very interested in past months, and the possibility of sort of a basic English common law being founded and then building back off that, because that's essentially what the law is now, isn't it? It was sort of legislated on top of and on top of and on top of, until the point where it's become so bureaucratic that it just doesn't work anymore. Something that I can liken it to is where I'm working at the moment. I'm a roofer, so the people who we work for are quite sort of they're legitimate and things. So they insist on 5 points of PPE. Now we're roofers who wear hard hats on top of the roof, and it's one of these things where there's so much health and safety involved now that it actually makes it almost dangerous, because you've got so much stuff on you all the time, and this clobber and things that you have to remember all of the time, that you start making mistakes on other things. And it's almost a perfect analogy to what's happened to our law, really, where
Yes,
it's come so far away from what it was originally meant to do.
Yeah. That's too many bells and whistles. And if my Scottish correspondent colleague, David Scott, was with us, he would be nodding enthusiastically, because he's a civil engineer. And he thinks of the gents like you when he designs buildings, and he's gone into it in some depth and has looked at a lot of disaster and accident reports, and knows that the basis of risk management is using your judgment. He quotes that at people who wrongly over scientificize risk and say risk is an infallible calculation from a kind of a Douglas Adams Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy machine that says 42 is the answer to the life universe and everything. He will refute that, but he'll equally refute the idea that risk management is all about covering as many risks as possible. You've got to judge the likelihood of the risk, have trust in the people who are dealing with those risks every day, and that is very transferable to what's happened in Parliament, where in the Victorian era, it really was a gentleman's part-time club. You would have your day job, then you would go to legislate for a couple of hours in the evening, for not all year round either. And now we've transferred to this safety first approach, where people's feelings mustn't get hurt and people mustn't be given the wrong messaging. And so even more than France, which was the big legislative knee-jerk country in the past, we are now bringing in statutes and secondary legislation, which doesn't even go properly through Parliament, just gets nodded through by them, for everything. And the coming out of the EU has solved nothing. If we seceded from the UN and NATO, it wouldn't help, because that knee-jerk reaction is still there in our governing class.
Alex, do you sort of believe in the sort of restoration, of constitutional common law,
yes,
as held in the Magna Carta and the Charter of?
Yes, it's a difficult one to talk about in nationalist and patriotic circles, because not that we want to get involved in mudslinging, but there will always be people who say you're not English enough or not British enough in your approach, or you're not statutory enough, or you're too statutory. But I wholeheartedly endorse that Magna Carta, which itself is a restatement of much earlier principles, holding the abusive executive powers feet to the fire, is what happened in 1215. That absolutely is the basis. Now, some people who hold that strongly, and I don't like naming names, but since you ask, Daddy Dragon is one of them. I have never sought a contention with him. I had a friendly debate with him on my YouTube channel when I was running that. It's just a bit dormant now. I haven't deleted it. You can still find that debate there. The YouTube channel is called Alex Thomson, Eastern Approaches. And the title of that debate is there a British Constitution? Now, his position, of course, is that all the good stuff is English, and that all the bad stuff he dubs British for convenience. But I won't go with that. There was a rollover of the English constitution into a British constitution. We have a whole series about that. Go to ukcolumn.org, and then the series on the menu bar, and you'll find a dissident's guide to the constitution. And when we get into the historical part of that podcast series, I want to major on Magna Carta. Historians will have a laugh at you, the mainstream ones, and say, of course, you realize this was just a bunch of barons asserting their privileges. But the principles there are timeless, and way back before that, to the Norman conquest, and even before there was a Norman law and custom in the country, the English had a very strong understanding that certain rights are inalienable and can't be overturned by anything. They're indefeasible. And that's what's contained in Magna Carta, together with, of course, a lot of stuff that was of its time and place. But that's the timeless basis. And it's been reasserted time and again. Betty Boothroyd, the recently deceased Speaker of the House, the last good one, remember, the lady who used to shout order, order in the House of Commons, she was one of those who said that Magna Carta was still law. If you get up to the really serious levels of the judiciary, at least before the Blair era woke judiciary started infiltrating, they all agreed that Magna Carta has never been defeated when it gets to the top courts.
Yeah, I've recently been reading the book by Ken Dowdney, Democracy Defined. It's my first dip, I'll be honest, into the constitutional common law, And I find it absolutely fascinating. I'm about 2/3 through at the moment, but yeah, I'm finding it fascinating, and I certainly believe that there's a lot in that we can look at. I do believe it's got to come hand in hand with us as individuals taking back control of our own lives from the state as well. Yes. I don't think you can just rely on one thing to fix it all. But yeah, that would and a true trial by jury, of course. You know,
this is key. This is what Will Keat, Keyte, with the Hardwick Alliance, a very solid group of people who meet around Sir Julian Rose's. Sir Julian Rose's property in Oxfordshire. That's what they call the Hardwick Alliance. They've got into GB News recently as well. They've been platformed on a wider channel, which is good to see. They're very strong on this, that jury trials are the final backstop. They're severely under threat in England, even more so in Scotland, unknown on several continental countries now, and with good reason, because the jurors do often say, no, we will not go along with this tyrannous measure, or can't you see the guy was acting in self-defense, or can't you see the guy was protecting his daughter from an abuser, right? And these arguments won't wash with a professional judge, because they come from a completely different walk of life, and they believe in the state, and facetiously claim that they're independent of the state when they get their money from the taxpayer and their training from state universities. It's a preposterous argument. But that's the basis of the problem. Yes, so every law, even if it is a valid statute, has to be not only under our God-given rights, and Magna Carta is a great touchstone of that, and a very key one, but they also have to be, consistent with the case, the facts of the case as heard by the jurors. That's the very reason we have juries.
Absolutely. Yeah, I like the phrase in the book when it says, "When is a judge not a judge? When he's not a member of the jury."
Right. It's exactly right. The judge was the convener in English common law. And this is getting to a wider audience now. Will Keat, through Neil Oliver, has been talking about it to people who would never have read constitutional material in the past, because they realise something's wrong.
Yeah, well, what it really rings to me, I mean, I'm just this layman's guy, I have this ability to take sort of really complicated subjects and digest as much of it as I can, and then come out with sort of a layman's term. But what I really see and feel with this is it almost sort of strikes me as the old saying that every Englishman's home is their castle. And I know that seems really insular, but if you think about it, it has wider implications, really, because this can really speak to, I mean, the fact that laws that apply in London don't apply to a village in southern England.
This is crucial. This is crucial, because the judges have been to metropolitan universities and come, even if they were raised in a village or suburban area, they're part of a metropolitan culture. And absolutely, you don't even have to get ethnic and cultural differences, by going to Wales or even a far-flung part of England, as seen from London. If a home county village has got different norms. The crime novels, the Agatha Christie types, used to talk about this, didn't they? That's not how things work down here, they say. So obviously the jurors should be judging the people who are their peers, who are there from their community.
Absolutely. And this, this communication between sort of London laws and everything else, when the knife, I think I said this on a previous podcast, so I don't want to sort of bore people, but it is kind of a valuable point. That in London, when all the stabbings were happening, and there was the excessive ones where it was a real kind of shock and went through Parliament. So the government, we've got to do this big campaign. So, they spent millions of pounds on leaflets and had them, distributed throughout the country. And while I do agree with it, and that, something needs to be done about knife crime, I mean, that is very centralized into big cities where you have a lot of multiculturalism and all the rest of it. You can't deny these facts. But the funny thing is, I was actually working in Hereford at the time, and we used to stop at this little village bakery in the morning to grab ourselves a hot pork roll and bacon sandwich or whatever on the way to work. And there they are, the leaflets in the village of, I can't even remember what the village is, but it was just so laughable that the leaflet essentially said, if you're caught with a knife, then it's a minimum of 10 years in prison. And it's kind of one of these things where you look around you and everyone in the shop is a farmer or a tradesman or whatever. We just wear knives on our belts because it's a tool. We don't stab. I think the last crime that happened in that area was in like the 1900s, you know, and
it's the same. All the Western countries after 9/11 brought in non-discriminatory traveller scanning, didn't they? And the grannies had to be stopped at the same rate as the young men. You know, that's where it gets to. But while I remember it, there is actually a very fine PDF small book called A Layman's Guide to the English Constitution. Can't remember the gentleman's surname, but his Christian name, I think, is Alfred. And he starts with the Saxons, suitable given his name, Alfred. And that just shows how simple it is. There are people who come along, not of the caliber of that author or Candudney, who often say the English Constitution is simple. Here it is on a page of A5. No, you can reduce the common law to the 10 Commandments, and you can reduce it even further for those who don't like that specifically Judeo-Christian reference to do no harm and have no fraud in your transactions. Do not lie. That resonates with people's conscience, and that does cover, you know, the saying possession is 9/10 of the law. Well, that covers 9/10 of the common law, shall we say. There is obviously a huge amount of case by case decision. That's another distinctive of the common law, stare decisis, or standing by things previously decided, which means that judges do bind their successors in similar cases, which it's unknown on the continent. They just read the civil law code and make their own moral decisions, so they're susceptible to being told all kinds of yarns about, you know, in this case you should convict because. So that's how the model works, really. But it does go back down to how these very simple and obvious conscience-led principles work in practice.
Absolutely. Now, how do you see this evolving, Alex? You know, like in America, there's quite a strong sort of Christian nationalist movement coming through, you know, where people are obviously seeing the value of this, and that, you know, there's very little sort of left-wing comeback when you're dealing with sort of Christians. I mean, do you see that being something quite big in the UK in the near future, or?
Yeah, it will always undergo. Well, first of all, anything that starts in the States comes our way, so it's inevitable anyway, whether I want it to or not. Secondly, the best of the Americans are better Englishmen than better the English. They always have been. They've better understood our heritage. So what comes out of the likes of Tennessee or North Dakota or Montana is often going to be better English tradition than what you get in England. Thirdly, whenever you talk about white identity or Christian nationalism in the States, it undergoes a massive transformation because it's, you know, in moving from the European context, the Americans generalized, and there's a big debate with all of these big issues. One of the debates rating is, should nationalists who are, for example, Scots-Irish of descent or German or English in descent in the United States call themselves white? Or should they go for an identity like Southern or Midwestern, or should they say they're German American? That we don't have to deal with. That's for the American brothers to deal with. But it means that there is a lot of ridicule in the States, largely from the left-wing established churches, including the evangelical mainstream now, which is what I came out of at one stage in my life. Much harsher in America than it is in Britain, so that if you ever say that you're sympathetic to Christian nationalism, you get excommunicated and ridiculed and whatnot. We don't quite have that in the British church scene, because although we are led, sorry to say, by often quite a lot of duffers who tweet, there was one yesterday leading basically the equivalent of a denomination, tweeting that we shouldn't criminalize homosexuality because that would be bad, and Christians shouldn't do things like that because we don't live in this world. I'm paraphrasing extremely, but we get people like that, but we don't get the vicious, often evangelical rather than mainline church leaders that they get in America saying, if you say you're white, you're out. You know, we will fire you if you work for a church. You're out on your ear. You won't be able to pay your mortgage. Right. So the nastiness is coming to the fore. That some form of what has become known as Christian nationalism, popularized by Andrew Torba of Gab and a few others who've been writing books about it, is definitely going to come. There have been previous waves of this, of course, nothing new under the sun. There was a movement called kinism. I think it was largely American Presbyterian circles, but certainly American church circles. And of course, they had the whole 19th century, which is now weaponized against them, because if you quote it, you're supposedly pro-slavery. But there have been long struggles about this identity issue, and we're definitely going to get it in Britain. At some point, there is going to be something like a movement of Bible believers associating loosely. Perhaps they'll come out of their denominations to do so, who are no longer prepared to be horsewhipped verbally every time they say that they don't want the country taken over by foreigners. right? That will come. It will take on several legs. All the basket of deplorables will be in there. Such an association of Christians will find the guts again to say that child abuse should be punished with death. That's biblical and historical, and there will be some Christians saying it again. So we'll obviously be marked as the people who sound all the right, what they would call dog whistles, and all the right notes of hate. But we're already being tarred with the same brush. So who cares? Hope not hate personalised it to me in the case of UK column, because I talk to nationalists more, as with this evening, than other UK column guys. We all have our own niches that we cover in UK column, as it were. But what was the report? It was, these are the nasties, and they're talking about things, and they're talking about more and more things, and all the groups and interests are coming together. So yes, of course, there's going to be a Christian, let's call it for short, a Christian nationalist movement in Britain. You can see the stirrings of it, and Christians have to be very careful how they talk about their elders and betters for biblical reasons. So I'll just say there's a generation that will have to be called home. That's the polite Christian term for die, before we see this happen. But there are also elderly Christian ministers and elders I speak to who say, I envy you, Alex, and I'm glad you're not ordained, Alex, because you can say things that we think but we're not allowed to say, because the little old ladies, or rather the boys and dwarfs among our current church elders, would start a Twitter storm against us if we said them.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. I was, as I said, I was raised a Catholic, and for 40 years I was an atheist. My mother gave me the choice when I got to 11. I was at Catholic school. I left school, and you're talking about the 70s, and I was basically an atheist. And then about just over 4 years ago, my wife died, and I basically, that in a sense helped me find my faith. And there was other issues, other things that happened that came along to do that. But my first instinct was to go back to the Catholic Church, because it was something from my childhood. It was something that I related to. And I started going to the local Catholic Church. But to be honest, it didn't. And I'll say this from a Christian to a Christian, it didn't feel like God was there anymore.
Right.
It felt that he wasn't. He'd left it, because it just seemed to have gone so woke, even the Catholic Church, that I couldn't relate to it. And I'm just really hanging on to what you said there, that you probably think that it'll come out of many denominations may come together into a sort of a general feeling that we're Christian, and but we just cannot live with the organised churches at the moment. They've just gone too far.
That is already, Richard, a reality in a very small way on my channel on Telegram. And it's just one of many examples. The old Sunday school song, "You in your small corner and I in mine." And that's really all we can hope for. There's a long history of it. Well, obviously, there's a spectrum in the Christian church. The Roman Catholic Church is right at one end, claiming historically it has softened a bit, but it still basically claims to be the only church in which salvation is found. So you must be with our institution, right through to people who make it an article of faith, an equal and opposite reaction, like the Plymouth Brethren, who say you can't believe that there is a visible church anymore. You can only meet in a scattered assembly. Because it's all been destroyed. Theological underpinnings of that. Different people thinking, what is the church, and where's the church the Bible describes, and what nature does it have? Where do I find it? But people of all those convictions who are genuine Christians are already getting very disgusted. Roman Catholics, like you, have a particular problem, of course, because of what they've been taught in the past about you must be with us, we're Mother Church, extra ecclesiam nulla salus, they're the old saying, outside the church no salvation. But I was just in Switzerland a couple of weeks ago with, shall we say, a moderately nationalist, much more, I think, bourgeois dissident club. They actually call themselves bourgeois because they're Germans and everything like that. A bourgeois radio called Kontrafunk Radio, who have become COVID skeptics, Ukraine war skeptics, immigration skeptics. And they're all ex-equivalent of BBC, so ARD and ZDF and that kind of thing in Germany. And I was speaking to a lady called Birgit Keller, who's written whole books on how disillusioned she was with the Roman Catholic Church. But her particular approach is to stay in and tell the bishops, you're not a real bishop if you let this go through. But of course, then there's a real problem of conscience for the Catholics, isn't there? Is the current Pope valid or not? There are such people as sedevacantists, to use the posh Latin phrase, who say that the seat, the chair of Peter is vacant because the last 2 or 3, depending on who you talk to, have been imposters. That is a valid Catholic position, which has historical parallels. There are others who say the Pope is still what the Catholics would call the Holy Father, but he's severely mistaken. A bit like how in English common law, you don't tell the judge, or much less the king or queen, that they've made a mistake. You say, Your Majesty has, well, to the judge, you say you've misdirected your mind. And to the king or queen, you say you've been misguided, misadvised. That's as far as you can go. But it's a personal struggle of conscience. And the Bible doesn't give you definitive answers on these things, being God's word for all times and all places. It talks about what happens to the remnant and how the remnant will be judged faithful. And more generally than that, in secular terms as well, at UK Column, we use this term often, David especially, we're looking to talk to the remnant. We're not attempting to reach most of society. We know that those who recognize the message, whatever the theme is, will respond, will heed what we're saying.
Yeah, very true. I was told by, I don't know the Latin word for that, so I'm not even going to try and repeat it, the one that you mentioned, but that the Vatican hasn't been valid since 1963 or 62 or something.
Yeah, that's the year of the Vatican Council. A lot of Catholics have taken that position. They think a lot of things have been invalid since then.
And I was advised by this guy, a Catholic. He said, "Come to the Latin masses. It's still sort of valid, but I haven't as yet gone to a Latin mass. I might try that out. There's one in Birmingham at the Oratory. I might go to that and see what that's like. Because obviously,
you get a lot more pro-nationalist and decent people coming to the Latin, the Tridentine masses. You'll find a lot of foreign Catholics, of the right kind of convictions there as well. And, people I'm not suggesting to personalize it to you or anything, but people looking for more or better friends or even for a life partner often do that because they know that, that's a self-selection. And there are equivalents in Protestantism as well. If you go to such a meeting, then whether it's worship or just a political meeting or something like UK Column, and our first UK Column marriage is coming up, I'm going to be best man actually. You know that you're going to find like-minded people. There'll still be disappointments. You'll still meet time wasters and trolls, but we manage to deal with them. And there's far fewer time wasters than there are in general society.
It's a hard balance to strike, isn't it? Running our organisation, we face similar struggles on a regular basis, but it's something that you have to do, isn't it? It's part of the job, as they say. Something that we were really pleasantly surprised with the other day over on, oh no, I get this wrong every single time. I even practiced that before the show. That one. That's it. Yeah, that's it. We're having a dance. So this Ends Now campaign, we've actually got a road show going at the moment where every couple of weeks we go to a town of random choice and just go and talk to the general population, about the sexualization of children, the current curriculum, what's happening, what's being pushed in Scotland, in Wales, about parents not being able to confer with their teachers about what's being taught in the lessons and requesting information about the lessons and not being able to get it. So we go out into town and we just talk to people, don't we, Rich? It's just we don't make it overt or anything, just it's a general chat, and I was really pleasantly surprised that I got talking to a young, would he be classed as a preacher, Rich? Would you say? I think he was.
I don't know. He's a young Christian lad, and he was sort of handing out leaflets and stuff himself, wasn't he?
Yeah, he does. He was saying that he did quite a lot of speaking and stuff, and I was actually quite shocked, because we were just sort of talking about the sexualization of kids and the teachings behind it and that sort of thing, the LGBT sort of agenda, as it were. And he was really forthright using, biblical strict scriptures behind what he was saying and was standing quite strong to that. I mean, there's an interview on the channel there that, you might want to give it a watch, but I was really pleasantly surprised to hear you almost see sort of the society coming out in it, where you have like the older generations who completely understand and they're like, yeah, these things just aren't the same, and we can see everything changing. And then you've got the middle of the road guys, the kind of middle-aged ones who tend to just not care because they're in their little bubble and they're just like,
Yes.
no, I just want to go on about my day, you know. And then you have the young people who genuinely seem quite frightened by the future that's set out for them, you know. And while that was quite hard to swallow, it's also quite positive, you know, to know that they're realizing what's going on.
Yes, what shall we say? We don't want to generalize about whole generations, but you cannot ignore the time of a person's birth and upbringing any more than you can ignore the nationality or the place, which of course are two different things, because to be born to English parents in India does not make you Indian, you know. So there are things that are shared experiences of a generation. They were at a formative age when certain things happened, you know. Our thoughts about 9/11, for example, are very different to Generation Z's thoughts about 9/11 because they were born afterwards. Our thoughts about JFK are very different to those of our parents who remember it happening in '63. That's just one trivial example. So a generation it does have a zeitgeist, a spirit of the age. It does have a generational psyche. And there are ways to reach such people. I catechize, that is, teach Christian doctrine to teenagers in our church. And I know that, you know, that there are ways of tapping into the fears that they have in a very sensitive, you know, way. But clearly they're worried about whether they will be able to afford a house, whether they will be permitted to raise children in a Christian manner. And these were not things that were discussed when I was at a Christian youth group. To put it mildly, the assumption was, of course, you'll be wealthier than us because that's how it's been for 3 generations from parents to children. You'll be freer than us. We warn you not to be carried away by the things of the world. And all of a sudden, I get to the age of teaching young people, and I'm saying, well, even if you get kicked out of house and home, you should follow the Lord Jesus. A very different kind of catechism. So yes, the approach is different, but the young man you met, whether he's ordained or not, presumably won't have gone to a big name seminary or a university academic setting for his theology, because it might do. There's always vanishingly rare exceptions that prove the rule. But in the main, if you've gone to one of those, the first thing you do is learn to be ironical and contextualize all the scriptures. So any scripture you quote to such a person, they'll say, well, yeah, no, it doesn't really mean that. No, I learned that in my first week at uni. So if he's not of that kind, well done. But now if he makes his living from preaching the gospel, he and all who are like-minded with him are going to have to find people, either what we call in Christian circles a tent maker job, that is a way to fund himself as the Apostle Paul did, working manually so that he can preach, or he's going to have to find people to subsidize him outside the church structures, which does happen already, by the way.
Just to totally segue and change everything, Alex, believe it or not, even though we're a small organisation, we have a team of researchers, and a big shout out to Kit, who's done some research for me. She found, I was watching this afternoon, a thing that you did, a testimony that you gave to the grand jury of the People's Court of Public Opinion on a group of families and their plans for world domination using mind space and mind control. Yeah. I wonder if you could elaborate a bit more on that for me.
That was a tall order, Richard, but it's gone down well. It's been subtitled in Japanese and Hebrew and all kinds of things. The brief I was given, and it's a bunch of lawyers led at the time by Rainer Fumich, people might have heard that name, who's also a California attorney. He's now in the States, if I remember correctly, and he's unfortunately fallen out with the group that's put that together, but he has his own work now. The brief I was given by this then united team of largely German lawyers was, can you give us the historical background? Because what they were aiming to do that week was, it's classically based common law again, to see whether there's a case to answer or not to go to a court trial. And England abolished this by statute unlawfully, but you're supposed to have a grand jury, which the Americans still have, which is a larger group of people determining whether it looks like something smells fishy or not. If not, it won't go to trial. It's the first filter mechanism to guarantee that we won't be vexatiously and repetitively prosecuted by a nasty state that doesn't like us, right? So that's what a grand jury is for. In this setting, the mock-up, the mock trial, the mock hearings, was to show the world in a week or so of hearings, there's clearly a case to answer that in the first instance, the COVID jabs were nefarious. That was the first point of departure. And Reiner's idea with his colleagues was, in organising these sessions, he said, the first session I want to be historical, and I'd like Alex and a few others, Matthew Ayres in Canada was one who defied, our own Brian Gerrish and our nursing correspondent Debbie Evans and a few others that evening, was to say, here is the indication that we have been ruled, particularly in Britain, for at least 100, 150 years by a self-styled elite. Elitists is perhaps a better word, a cabal, who consist of certain families who regard themselves as born to rule and who don't regard the rest of the population as fully human. Or if they do, they would say, well, humanity is nothing much, we want to be transhuman. So that was the long backstory. I was trying to trace a lot of philosophy. And, you know, there are not many of us who are reasonably well read in history who are also unafraid to talk about, for example, Satanism. And since I'm one of them, and since UK Column has repeatedly talked about the victims of Satanist ritual abuse, not just generally of child abuse, my name came to the fore. And I'm glad I gave that. It was not a hard exercise to be forced to generalize without lying or omitting things that are important in half an hour or so. But I focused on the City of London, the money-making part of the British Empire, and how it has always regarded everyone else, including the Church of England and certainly Parliament, as beneath it in the hierarchy. And that, therefore, you're talking about certain families who own the wealth in the City of London, who basically tell the Bank of England, the Church of England, the Parliament, the Crown what to do.
Yeah, there was a point at the beginning where you were talking around 1870 when the Bank of England, the City of London, and you mentioned that it was the basis of all debt. Can you elaborate on that?
That's two things that we need to tease out. The first is the creation of the Bank of England in 1694. Now, the Bank of England was not the world's first central bank. That was the Riksbank in Sweden. They were the first in the 17th century to come up with a lot of statist ideas. Not all of which were bad, by the way. They were the first to have ombudsmen, independent watchdogs who couldn't be told what to do by the government. But that model then spread to England and then to France as the central bank. And it came about after our constitutional revolution, 1688. William III was installed, and within a few years, he was told by the new crowd that thronged around the crown, we need a Bank of England, and it will issue currency. Until then, currency had just been a weight of gold or silver, as it was all the way back to biblical times, and as it should be, independent of any government attempt to define it. But all of a sudden, because also people were getting used in the early modern era to have convenient paper notes, it was much lighter to carry and more secure, supposedly, than lugging your gold around. So that the banknotes coming in at the time, or the bankers' notes, I should say, from these private families, were already familiar to people. So the idea was, right, let's monopolize and centralize that. There won't be the Bank of the Fuggers or the Bank of whatever Italian family you care to mention. It will just be the Bank of England. And so that club really clubbed together, and there's a lot of secrecy from the Bank of England about the historical and the current shareholders. Although you can get a list, it's hard to get. I've got a copy of who the shareholders were in 1694 when it was set up and how much debt they owned in the system. But the fairly incontrovertible bit, and you know, as always, when I mention such things, people I'm very happy to receive correction if I'm wrong about this, but all the sources I have tell me that there's £12.5 million sterling in 1694 money, which is probably trillions today, certainly billions. And that was the base that allowed the money to circulate through the economy in the new system, that sum. But all of that was debt. The Crown was on the hook to the private bankers who were the shareholders in the Bank of England for that money. And what I'm told is that that money is the basis of all the debt that has been leveraged since. Whenever there's been lending, it's based on that. So if you were one of those families or their heirs and successors, you have got, you're laughing all the way to the bank, to use a pun. But that was one thing. The 1870 thing was when I was talking in another part of that testimony about when these philosophies really came to the boil, that you need to control people's mind. That was the City of London thinking, oh dear, we have serious competition now, particularly from Germany and afterwards from Russia and the USA as well. What are we going to do? These nations are livelier, more vigorous, harder workers, more gifted in many ways than us, certainly got massively more resources. What are we going to do? We're not going to compete with them fairly. We don't have that confidence in our own people. Instead, we're going to try to nobble those peoples and make them pro-British in their sentiments. And if we can't manage that, we're going to make them destroy each other.
Is that the basis of the mind space and mind control?
Yes, that was what I was. That was my peg on which I hung all the thoughts about mind space, which Brian, I'm glad, was able to take over from me about later on, because he discovered, or certainly popularized, the discovery of the mind space document written by the Institute for Government and the Cabinet Office in 2010. There were 2 documents mentioning mind space back in that year, and within a few years, Britain was boasting that it had collaborated with the French and spun the model out to the USA and Australia as well. And now every Tom, Dick, and Harry's doing it. Your local council, foreign governments, everyone's using behavioral techniques, fundamentally unconstitutional and immoral.
Yeah, they call them nudge units, don't they?
That's right. Yeah. Cass Sunstein, an avowed Maoist, the husband of a horrible warmonger in the USA, Samantha Power, who was the US tip-top diplomat at the UN for some years recently. Cass Sunstein wrote the original thinking about nudging, popularizing it to the political class. So Obama got hold of that Chicago thinking, really, and that went over very quickly to Cameron. The official story, which I don't believe, is that Cameron spotted Cass Sunstein's book called Nudge on some flunkey's desk as he was walking out of the office one Friday, and borrowed it over the weekend and enthused about it, and came back on Monday and said, we're all going to nudge now. No, I don't believe that, but that era was when we were bringing it in the early 2010s.
Another part of that talk which interested me was you were saying about the Second World. I think most of the Second World War, though I believe you meant the First World War as well. I believe it involved both. About how basically London, or the bankers, or London in its proxy Wall Street,
yes,
funded all the sides. So
yes.
so basically Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia were funded by the same people.
Now, there are Third Reich keynotes who always have a go at people who make this argument in any kind of awake circles, whether you're talking nationalist or constitutionalist or whatever. They always say, actually, turn irony on, actually, I think you'll find that the Nazis did it all by working wonderful monetary wonders, and they really industrialized the country, and they had their own funds. Tosh. You know, the money they got and the trading links they had are quite incontrovertible. The Soviet Union and the Third Reich in the 20s and 30s, of course, the Third Reich didn't come about to 33, but the gentlemen of that era in both Germany and Russia who formed these totalitarian systems, there were a few in each. There were mostly oafs and thugs, but there were a few in both in Berlin and Moscow who were international businessmen. And they saw eye to eye with the international businessmen that they did dealings with, particularly in Wall Street, which by that stage was the City of London's senior partner in a sense. You can personalize it to some of the reconstructors of post-war Europe, like W. Averell Harriman, who basically told Europe to unite militarily if it had any hope of American funding. He was the man who held the Marshall Fund purse strings in the late 40s. And Harriman had personal interests in Soviet enterprise, Soviet industry, and they wanted a new market for their monopolies. This is a well-known area of research. Anthony Sutton was the English professor at Stanford who researched it all, wrote books about it, and eventually lost his tenure at the Hoover Institute at Stanford for talking about this too much. He really kept the receipts. You know, there's some eye-popping details in there. The car factories and the heavy plants that the Soviets built in the Stalin era, the Brezhnev era, when, you know, deep in the Cold War. And also when this equipment was being used against the US in Vietnam because the Soviets were close Vietnamese allies. All of that stuff was Ford technology produced under license. And that's one example. Agnelli, the Fiat magnate, a key globalist who was in all the clubs of globalists, personally oversaw some of that work in the Soviet Union as well. With the Nazis, I'm not saying that the whole Third Reich elite was like this, but certainly the English gentleman type, handful among them, Hess and Goering, they personally were used to dealing with the City of London and Wall Street. You've got Hjalmar Schacht, of course, running Nazi money. The Bank for International Settlement, which is the central bank of central banks in Switzerland, was set up in this era. Schacht was intimately dealing with Monty Norman, so Montague Norman, who for nearly a quarter of the century between the wars and during the Second World War was the head of the governor of the Bank of England. And, you know, details I won't forget reading from Sutton, such as that there was an account called Conto S, personally run by Heinrich Himmler, who arguably was done in by the British when he was captured because he knew too much. That was certainly a claim made by David Irving, with some justification, I think. But Himmler had this personal slush fund when he ran the SS called Konto S, or Account S, and it was more than half of the money that came in to that was coming from, I think, one particular conglomeration in New York, in Manhattan. Was it a communications giant? I think it was. It's all in Sutton's books, and he sampled the beginning and the end of the Third Reich. He sampled the years 1933 and 1944, did Anthony Sutton, and he found that in both of those years, right from when the Nazis were new in power to when they were nearly being defeated on the battlefield by the US. Of course, the Soviets in the lead, but the US is what's more material to this part of the inquiry. In both of those years, it was American bankers who were funding the majority of that personal account of Himmler's. And the argument they would use would be, oh, well, we still have to keep international banking and justice going, and we have to respect patents. We're not communists, Oh, no, heaven forfend, we're not communists. So we have to pay for intellectual property. Again, bunkum, because intellectual property was stolen by all the major powers, regardless of alliances, and it has been. And yet, when it was convenient to do so, massive payments were used and technology transfers were used. Money went in and out of Nazi Germany, both directions, pretty freely, showing that, this goes back to 1870 again. The families who gave the Nazis the ideas in the first place for mind control and enslaving the population, domestic as well as supposed lesser races, that thinking came from London. That thinking came from the British deep state.
It's I watched a program on the History Channel once. It was like a biography of Himmler.
Mm-hmm.
And right at the beginning, I always remember, because right at the beginning it says one of the most curious incidents of the war was that just before the end, after Hitler had died, Himmler sent a letter to Churchill and Lord Rothschilds asking him to help him. But they never explained it in this program.
That was his death warrant, Hess as well, although he escaped death, allegedly, depending on whether you think Hess was the real Hess. And I've spoken to people who guarded him. But if you want to boil it down to the commonalities between Goering, who supposedly topped himself on the eve of his execution, Hess, Himmler, fools that they were, or swaggering that they were, because Goering in particular was a bullying, overconfident ego type. They all thought, I can do deals with the British deep state and live to tell the tale. No, you can't. No, you can't. They will do you in. For the same reason, I'm personally convinced that most of the so-called Kremlin assassinations of so-called defectors from the Russians to us in the last 15 years have probably been done by our deep state. I'm far from alone in thinking that. I know it makes people's eyebrows rise, but they have motive, the means, and the opportunity more than the Kremlin does. Common again, they're the enemy of the moment for public consumption, but it's a dangerous thing to be in the faction that's supposedly at war with Britain, and then to approach the British deep state and say, can we come to a settlement here, or please play fair, gentlemen. You will not be treated well.
Well, this is it. I mean, there was all the financial stuff that surrounded around the party being built in the first place, wasn't it? Because Hitler had originally tried to offset the costs of Mein Kampf against his political party, and they refused it in government, which basically left them in a situation where they were going to go bankrupt overnight. Then it's one of those things. What do you do? Do you turn to your enemy to keep alive, or do you just die in the water and have their particular dreams sort of fall flat? So I know that there's a lot of speculation behind the funding from that point onwards. I mean, I know later on, sort of after the war had begun, there's a massive argument that the Reich was essentially propped up just by advancing, taking territory and taking resources thereafter, because they just couldn't keep up with the costs essentially of running the war and the people and running everything else in between. So yeah. By the way, Alex, I just want to say thank you. You're an absolute font of knowledge, and it's so interesting to hear you talk. It really is, honestly. No, I really appreciate you coming on tonight.
That's a really kind compliment. I appreciate that. I'm far from a world expert in the things I talk about, but at least I can accurately summarize what's being said by reliable people. And people seem to accept it credibly when I say, Smith has a better argument than Jones. That seems to carry some weight. So, that's what I do. I digest arguments and as fearlessly as I can tell people what I think holds water and what doesn't.
Going on from that program I watched, I take it am I right in saying you went to rugby and then Cambridge?
That's right.
And I remember you saying in one part of the testimony that I think it was when you were at Cambridge, that the attitude towards the ordinary people was that they were livestock cattle.
Yeah, that was more particularly rugby, although it's no less a problem at Cambridge or at international bodies that I now interpret for, or in the British civil service hierarchy, but it's more disguised there. When you're talking about 13 to 18-year-olds at boarding school, it's more naked. It's those are plebs, we hate them. Yeah, and very much so. The attitude was, I'm rich because my granddad knows how to shaft those plebs. For anyone who thinks I'm going to have a go at the nasty Jews who exploit our people, I only knew one Jewish boy who was of that attitude in my cohort, to maybe 7 or 8 thoroughgoing English Gentiles who were of the same City of London mentality, who were worse than that Jewish boy.
When did you first realise there was something wrong? Because obviously you went from education and an education that would have sort of geared you to be a vassal of the state, really, a useful tool to the state. And when did you go from that to being a dissonant, really?
I can date it, actually, Richard, and I wrote a piece about this, which people can find on ukcolumn.org by searching for Unforgotten. That will bring it up, or Welshman, as in MEN, because it's Two Unforgotten Welshmen, is the full title. Because on the 8th of February 93, my housemaster committed suicide because of the absolute shockers that he was trying to have to educate and their horrendous attitudes. And I describe in some detail that was the day I resolved not to become an establishment man. But that's obviously crystallizing it for the purposes of a blog, an article. More generally, by the time I went up to rugby age 12, so I was a year ahead of my rest of my cohort, as it were. Normally you go up at 13. I already knew from my parents what to expect among them. There were some very good toffs as well. I don't write off the whole class of them. But those who made their money from the City of London, I have very little time for, unless I can satisfy myself that they are the genuine rare exception. The City of London is toxic. It's a cancer on the nation, and even just in economic terms, it has caused the burgeoning of Greater London to a point where, even when we had an empire, there's no point in having 8 to 10 million people in that conurbation. And we're still, because we're not a very large island, we're certainly not tiny as people often call us abroad. We're a mid-sized country geographically and populationally. But at the size we are as a nation, there's not enough counterbalance to London. Even if you united, as people are trying to do, including up to the government level, the whole M62 corridor or the whole West Midlands to Liverpool sort of coffin-shaped area as a single conurbation, or governed it, or tried to psych people up to think of themselves as one conurbation, you still wouldn't rival London economically or culturally, and that's a death sentence to the nation. Germany, for example, or Italy have got a far better balance where several cities are world cities, and these things deeply affect people. They give the region an inferiority complex, and so that's just one of the many ways in which the City of London has been doing the devil's work for far too long.
Yeah, I mean, so taking it from a Christian point of view, how, with these families that control everything in the City of London, how much do you believe that they are, should we say, they are the satanic forces, or
they work
under
with
control?
You can't ever definitively say that a person is the devil incarnate. It's not for nothing do we use that as a tongue-in-cheek idiom, because we know it's over the top, right? People can open themselves up according to the best theological understandings of the Bible and the most astute people in church history. Not all of them who are exorcists, but who are prepared to take this possibility seriously and who've worked conscientiously as Christians. They would all concur, I think, most of them would concur, that a person can open themselves up to demonic possession to such an extent that there's very little of themselves left, that they're just a shell. I've heard talk of 5 levels, that, if you're level 5, there's basically no you left. There's only the devil's talking. And that would be too specific for my understanding, because I just haven't got the data to go on, the personal observations. But that's the general consensus And the Bible itself is quite explicit, although not very detailed on these things, because it doesn't want to awake idle curiosity or frighten people unnecessarily. But the Bible does talk repeatedly about people who consciously and willingly give themselves to Satan, to devils, in a Faustian bargain. Again, that's not just an idiom. Faust, the greatest work of literature in German by Goethe, talks about someone making just such a pact. You give me your power, you infuse me with your nastiness, and you can do what you like with me, and I'll be along for the jollies. So there are such people, and it's intergenerational as well.
And when you talk about this, Alex, I did, just sort of drawing a bit of a point to it, but you saw something on this level, and to sort of put it into context, was at the start of the COVID when all the stuff was going on in China and everyone was a little bit kind of worried about things. And even if you didn't believe, you're a bit like, oh, don't really fancy sort of, having that happen to me or whatever. Then it hit the UK and there was a few cases in Europe and whatever. And we had our Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, at the time sort of stood up. And do you know what? It was one of the first times that I felt that like a politician actually stood up and was being truthful. He was like, look, we've got this big thing on the horizon.
Your intuition tells you, doesn't it?
All together as a country. And I was behind him, and he was talking about herd immunity and, if we need to, we'll shut down, different postcodes to allow, people to contract the virus, and we won't let it spread too fast. And I was absolutely behind him. I was applauding him and saying, what a fantastic, sensible way of going around this pandemic. And within a week, he'd been talked to by the capitalists, fearmongers and all the rest of it, told him how much money him and his pals could make from personal health equipment and the masks. And then the pharmaceutical companies step in and, put the claw on his shoulder and say, hey, we could produce you a vaccine pretty quick. And, it might not be as bad as everyone's saying it is, but, let's do this and we can make a quick packet. You saw that change, where all of a sudden it wasn't sensible thoughts anymore. It was just, oh well, we've had this, this particular specialist has given us this advice, so we've got to go with it. It really did ring of the beginning of the beginning of the war in Iraq. There was a lot of experts telling us and telling our officials, what was going on, and going with them, when really we should have been looking at the actual facts that were coming through and going forward. Sorry, Alex, didn't mean to break you there, but that was just a real kind of a real note to me, that when I really, really realised that our government was not there for our best interests anymore.
It's nothing to apologise for there, Joe, because we all have these moments where the light bulb goes on, or where things become real to us that were theoretical in the past. A bit like Richard's question just then about when did you realise the establishment was rotten? Well, Adam Smith says there's a great deal of ruin in the nation. These things don't happen overnight. You understand the principles, then you see it in practice. Then you get, when you're mature and fully aware of what's going on in early adult life, depending on the time and place you live in, there's always a shocker that makes you think, oh, this is really, really, really bad. It's not theory anymore. I could see this guy or this institution fall before my eyes. And then you realize there's other powers.
The other thing from it is following on from what we were just talking about. I've got to be very careful, because this is YouTube, and if we want to keep on air, we've got to be careful how we talk about this. But there was an experimental medical procedure carried out on people. And one of the things you talked about in your talk was copyrighting human beings, so they no longer belong to the creator.
Yeah.
Obviously, be careful how you say, like, a certain word, like, experimental medical procedure.
I believe Britney Spears is a well-known euphemism.
Britney Spears, yes.
So what shall I say about that? That was a way of bringing things to a point as best I could, and I think it was in response to a lady's question as well, because in a real grand jury, and therefore also in the mock-up, you do get grilled, and the question was, what's the ultimate aim? And this is all hocus pocus, right? It's not real scientifically, morally, legally, or any other way. But that said, the thinking which does motivate, because that's what the lady was asking, so I answered, and a good question too, that the thinking that motivates them all ultimately is, with their completely absent knowledge of science, morality, history, religion, law, anything else they claim to be expert in, the thinkers, or the elitists pushing the thinkers in this direction from above the think tanks, are motivated by this very devilish idea that we can outwit God. If we encode ourselves or our ownership into people, then they don't have human rights anymore because we've tinkered with them. They're our creation. I mean, you can go right to the cosmic level with this, or back into, if you want to go into it, occulted prehistory, and you can go off-world. You can go anywhere. Any of these directions that we wouldn't normally go on UK Column. I just hold these things in skepticism, true skepticism. I don't laugh at any of them. I'm well aware of the claims made. And the main thing is that it's a real religion and a real conviction to those who think about it. They think they've done it successfully in the past, in some ancient version of humanity, and they think that they're entitled to have a go again. And for a lot of the people, the religion, the Satanism, consists in the having a go. You know, they're having a pop at God, even if you know it's a suicidal endeavor.
Do you think this all connects to the transhumanism side of things and this whole fascination with getting out into the stars and, you know, transpermia and all that kind of stuff? Do you think
Yes.
it's all hand in hand with that? Because I'm
Yeah,
a little bit
because
torn on it, to be honest with you, because, you know, I'm quite, I don't know, of course, there's like a fascination to, you know, can human beings sort of exist in, you know, in more than one place? And that does fascinate me, you know, the whole sci-fi side of things with that. But then I also see in order to do that, in order for human beings to actually travel past the, you know, past the Goldilocks zone, I forget what the
the Van Allen belt.
Yes, thank you very much, Alex. I was struggling to pull that out. We wouldn't be able to pass through that without at least transferring a lot of our body parts to mechanical things and shielding them from radiation and things like that. So really, it's kind of you almost need to hand over your mortality and your connection to this body and things to be able to do that. So yeah, I was interested to hear your thoughts on this.
Massive issue again, Joe, but I like that you don't shy away from them. I think the sensible reduction we can make there is, should we say, we're put on this earth. We have the godliest people in Christianity and in other religions, to be fair, who witnessed the claim about the moon landings in 1969, even laying aside whether it happened or not, or whether the footage is of something that really happened or faked footage of something that actually did happen. Never mind all that. The godliest and the most philosophical reaction all across the globe, including in the remnants in the Western Church, but more especially in other continents, was, what on earth does man think he's doing going to the moon? Isn't there enough for him to sort out here? So that is a good philosophical basis to go. So I know it's counterbalanced by, certainly among nationalists, there's an argument, a valid one, I think, that it's a particularly white, a European drive to slip his bounds, to discover more, and that if we didn't do that, we would stagnate and get depressed. I understand that argument too, but don't have a big narrative pushed at you in this regard. You can easily be sold a pup. Grand narratives about where all the sciences have converged and what's possible is likely to end in failure. Again, watch, it's still on the homepage at ukcolumn.org right now, an interview I did with two real world experts on artificial intelligence and why it will never rule the world. And another piece by a German writer for us about what is transhumanism. These lay out the groundwork. These projects are doomed to failure by the nature of the created order, the universe, the structure of the universe, and our capacities as humans will never allow us, say the real experts, to transgress those boundaries. And so any dreaming, especially if it has a time scale added for a bit of fake urgency that we must do this by 2030 or 2050, or we'll be able to do it by 2040, that indicates to me that someone is either panicking or wants you to panic, so that you don't take a healthy, skeptical look at what's going on there.
You see, this is the thing, isn't it? This is what catches me. You know, it's because I whatever it is that surrounds us or that is underlying in this world, you know, I feel that connection never more so than when I'm on my own and in nature, you know, hearing the bird song, hearing, you know, just feeling the growth of spring and just absorbing all of that, you know, and that's my kind of connection to the earth mother or God or whatever it is that how you describe it, and it is kind of one of those things, isn't it? You know, if you can find something like that under your feet, do we really need to travel to the stars to try and find something else and give up so much of ourselves along the way in order for that to happen? You know, if they haven't already, you know, I mean, the chances are they probably are mining asteroids as we speak anyway, but they simply can't bring any of those resources to Earth because it would just crush every economy on Earth. You know,
well, I mean, even if we don't get into those realms, which I'm perfectly prepared to entertain, unless it could all be done automated so that human bodies don't have to suffer these pressures on them. Even if we just go to the sort of the 1.0 version of this claim, which is that there's been you know, enough kilotons of gold mined which are still off the books, that if they were, you know, entered into circulation overnight, the gold price would collapse. I can well appreciate that possibility too. You know, so the mentality of all this hoarding and being several generations ahead of where official science is and technology, that all comes from this mentality. It's all for us. You know, the world hasn't been entrusted to us. It's our fiefdom. It's our domain.
Very interesting stuff. I'm really looking forward to catching up on these articles. I'm going to rewatch this. I'm going to rewatch this podcast. And I'm going to read everything that you've just pointed out there.
That's good. And there's a lot on the site. Just use the ukcolumn.org search function, the magnifying glass, and you'll find mentions of most of the stuff we've talked about if you look for the right keywords. Going back 10, 12 years in some cases, it's a while.
Brilliant. It is all fascinating. It really is, and it's all very interconnected, isn't it? It's what I love about all of these subjects. It's like, you know, we're kind of talking about Christianity and that sort of thing, and then how that has implications to sort of, you know, transhumanism and, you know, Satanism and that kind of stuff. You know, it's all very much connected, isn't it? Even I've done it again. Even like this stuff here, you know, I mean, you know, how does that not look like a devil? You know, it's you know, it's actively going out of your way to sort of represent, you know, Satan himself, and it's you know, there really does appear to be coming this time, doesn't there, where, you know, people are having to make this choice now, where it's sort of, you know, do we want to go that way, or do we want to go our own way and the way that we know, you know, because all of this and the way that we are now. I was trying to explain this to a lad at work the other day. You know, he's saying, "Oh, well, Joe, it's just, you know, it's just the way that the world is, and it's the way that things have gone." And I say to him, "Look, mate, no, that's not necessarily the truth. You know, the way that we're existing right now is like a blink in comparison to human existence before. You know, we've only been like this for a very short time. You know, this is why do you think it feels so natural for people to go out and do gardening and be at one with their own vegetables, and to have that inner fulfillment from doing these things and doing these things for yourself? And it's because these are hardwired into us for, you know, from tens of thousands of years of development and evolution, you know, to sort of get to where we are now. You know, this whole depending on the financial sort of side of things now is so new to us, you know, and it's why I think we suffer with so much depression, and, you know, why we have people that are so sort of mentally unwell these days, because it is just completely unnatural, isn't it? Yeah,
that's it. I mean, all that you've said there very sensibly, Joe, boils down to we still have will. That's all it is. You know, things are presented as a fait accompli, as an unavoidable reality. It's just the way things are going to be, and that's filtered down to the level of people's workmates. But it's a mind trick. You know, it's denying that you have a God who created you, that you have a Lord who bought you, that you have a mind and will of your own, that you have your own discretion, that you have your own principles. And the best people I find in any walk of life, in any place, are those who said, sod that. I have my principles. You know, and just to take the matter of digital identity. I say this on a few interviews now because I'm you know, saying it to myself until it's authentic enough that it will roll out of me at the moment of crisis, which is that if people say you must take this digital identity, my response will be, I'm prepared to starve to death, but I'm not prepared to be a slave. You know, when you talk to a walkmate and give that response, they'll know that you're actually serious, and that they will admit in their heart of hearts that they were just being glib and trying to get these nagging conscience questions off their back by retorting, "Oh, it's just the way things are." Just like when the Northern Ireland Troubles were coming to an ignominious fake solution in 1998, The pious sentiment was, oh, too many people have died for us to care about how it ends. It just needs to end now. It's just that it's been going on for too long. It's just it's anti-thought, anti-argument.
Following on from Joe pointing to that poster at the back of him like that, another program I was researching on that you've done, and it's still on YouTube, believe it or not. It was one to do with the Reigns list, and it was a list of sort of paedophiles, basically, people involved in paedophilia, because this all seems to be coming together. This sort of satanic thing, paedophilia. What's your thoughts on that? Because it all seems linked to me. Everything, the whole thing, just seems to be part of the same game. Paedophilia almost seems to go hand in hand with power at the moment.
One of the cleverest and noblest men I know, who's just getting up to speed on this now, and I'm giving him the best book tips to research the Satanist ritual abuse, has put it very well this way. He says, seems to be a systematic behavior of our elite. And others who I know personally, like Ronald Bernard, who became noted for his testimony about being invited to abuse children to get up to the highest level of money fiddling, and he couldn't do it, so he broke down and left at cost of his, danger of his life. They've all said that at the very highest circles, a few thousand people kind of level, owners of funds that own funds that own funds that own the central banks, that kind of level. It's just de rigueur. It's to prove your loyalty to the system, and they get a power rush out of it. And there's multiple testimonies from very different jurisdictions and cultures. And Cathy O'Brien is one of the most credible that David Scott and Brian Gerrish also rate highly as. That's Cathy with a C, and O'Brien with an E-N. Has written 2 very long books about how US presidents abused her. There's lots of testimonies coming out of the French-speaking world, both France and Belgium, and sometimes Switzerland and Canada as well. There's a far more detailed about them what we get in Britain. There's court records indicating that English juries and English judges were repeatedly successfully persuaded with their very high bar of evidence that particular abuse was Satanist in nature. There's been convictions for it in most of the Western countries. Even secular anti-religious governments like France have particular agencies against the cults, which openly say that Satanism is real and that children are abused because of it. Where do we end with all this? It's ridiculous to claim it's all conspiracy. I know you weren't making that argument, but we have to deal with people who are sometimes. It's nonsense. And Dr. Joan Coleman, who passed away a couple of years ago, wrote this definitive guide, really the best material there is, on who it is in British politics in recent decades who's known to have been involved in Satanist ritual abuse, either personally or as a witness or somebody who knew it was going on. She compiled that list with due care. Very recently, the excellent journalist Sonia Poulton, who people might know, she has the show Rise on BNT, brand new tube, recently tweeted in response to somebody who'd shared my reading on YouTube of the Reigns list written by Joan Coleman. Sonia said, well, I had the honor of meeting Dr. Joan Coleman in her later years, and I personally I'm very convinced by the thoroughness with which she put that list together and didn't just make wild accusations. Another man who said that is the late Robert Green, a dear friend of both David Scott's and mine, a Christian campaigner who went to jail in Scotland twice for not shutting up about Satanist ritual abuse in Scotland in the case of Holly Gregg, in particular from Aberdeen. And likewise, Robert went to see Dr. Coleman and wrote to her and assured himself that the list was put together with due care and attention. And it's got very high-ranking politicians and bishops and all kinds of it. TV figures, entertainers. These are people who more than one victim have named with details as being Satanist ritual abusers.
Yeah, like you said, it's entry into the club, isn't it?
Yes, it's not everyone in a particular profession, not every MP, not every banker, obviously. But if you want to be the inner circle, that's what you are told to involve. There are people who are reluctantly dragged into it, or even threatened that now you've already got to this level, we demand that you become a child abuser and a Satanist, and if you don't, we'll kill you, or something horrible will happen to your family.
Yeah, I saw something quite interesting the other day. Actually, it was it's kind of this like C-list celebrity lady. I don't even know who she is, to be honest with you, but she's talking to this kind of, I won't say his name, but a well-known podcaster, and they're talking, and they're on TV, and she's sort of talking quite candidly to this guy, and obviously kind of forgotten that she's on camera and that this is being recorded, and she sort of came out and said, oh, but you know how it is, though, don't you? I mean, I'm not even that important, and I've been offered crazy amounts of money to do stuff that I just didn't want to do, And she said, but I turned the money down, because I just didn't want to, I wasn't willing to put myself in that position. And the podcaster is actually going, shush.
Yeah.
And she says, oh, what, am I not okay to talk about this? She's like, no, you're fine. You're fine to talk about whatever you want. Just don't talk about that. Do not point that out.
Yeah.
And this is on live, and you think,
and it's not fear of being sued. She didn't say Wicked Corp offered me $25 million to appear in some bestial porn movie. No, she's just saying I was offered money to do nasty things. Oh, you can't talk about that. But it's a free country, and you can talk about whatever you want to.
Yeah, he didn't even know who she was talking about in particular. So it's got to be some exclusive club for him to sort of know exactly who she's talking about, by such a loose kind of statement, And
the likes of me are not afraid of them because they're losers and wimps and cowards, and they don't have a go at you. They run away.
Yeah, and I think the pullback to the the sort of the paedophilia and the connection to that, and I think the thing is it's the ultimate sin, isn't it? Hurting such innocence and causing pain to such an innocent being is the ultimate insult to God, isn't it?
That's why Satanism that's kind of where goes for it. It's an article of faith in Satanism. You've got to destroy the innocence, get back at God. Christ can't be got at. He's the ultimate victor. He's way beyond this scene already. But Christians, and just anyone on this earth who has God-given loveliness in them, so the younger, the better for this depraved thinking, they can be got at. Ultimately, it's not even about getting at those poor victims. It's trying to upset and belittle God and Christ, and trying to line up, as it were, all the dispositions of Satanism for a final onslaught in which some sects of Satanism kid themselves that they will defeat God. Some of them even think they'll do it physically with some kind of super weapon. It's crazy thinking. The more you realize these dark alleys of Satanism exist, the more you realize how sick and twisted they are. Just as foolish in that sense. But there are people who follow it as a religion. And once you're in it, you can't easily get out of it. Satan and his minions won't allow it to happen without a great struggle. Many have died trying to get out or gone mad trying to.
Well, for every reaction, there's an opposite and equal reaction. Well, we are the opposite reaction to your reaction, and we will not stop fighting you people until you are gone.
Right.
Because this...
And this is, if there's any Christians watching, I don't care about the fact checkers and the hope not hate state glove puppet people. They're welcome to watch and hate write about this. But if there's any Christians watching who thinks you shouldn't be talking to these untoward ethno-nationalists, I unashamedly will continue to do, brothers, because these ethno-nationalists are tackling the pederasty and the sexualization of children, and you are not.
Thank you, sir. Appreciated.
Thank you, Alex. It really is, honestly.
Very conscious of the fact that it's a bit later where you are, Alex.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously I think we'll probably wind it up there, Joe, yeah?
I'm so sorry. I've just looked at the time and it's been an hour and a half. Honestly, time flies when you're having a good time.
Yeah.
It's such a great conversation. Yeah, we probably should, because we do try to keep these sort of a reasonable length to keep people engaged and things like that. But Alex, I mean, if you'd like to do this again sometime, like we say, we're not setting this up as a strict interviewing thing, or so we're not going for backstories and origin stories and that sort of stuff. It's just a chat at the bar to talk about current events and really put the world to rights. So it's not something that we can't do again. So we'd really love to have you back on again at some point if that's agreeable with you. Oh, amazing.
Hope Not Hate will be setting their dials, waiting for the next episode to hit. I pity them. They have to watch all this stuff and then they have to rubbish it afterwards.
That's
It's
true.
a bad job.
I just want to say thank you, sir. It's been an absolutely one of the most interesting things I've done for a long, long time listening. Thank you for answering the questions as candid as you have, and it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. Always will be candid in the answers. No fear of that.
Oh, brilliant. Well, I can't to just mimic Rich's words there, honestly. Just it's been fantastic. And I really I could do this again. I could go for another hour and a half for sure. But yeah, it has. And it's so insightful. And I think everyone's got a lot to digest here and a lot of links to sort of catch up with. So, Alex, do you want to plug your stuff again real quickly? Just
yes.
at the end.
The news shows on which I am usually featured on a Wednesday is ukcolumn.org. And the best place to find it is simply the website itself. People can subscribe. It will shortly be a $5 a month is the basic subscription. They can watch for free, but they won't get the news extra, and they won't be supporting what for several of us now is full-time work. Then there is also on Telegram Eastern Approaches. There is a small YouTube channel which is not current anymore because other things overtook it, which is on YouTube called Eastern Approaches. Alex Thomson Eastern Approaches. I may revive part of that if I get the time. And UK Column is full service, so it does podcasts, which can be found on various podcasting platforms, and video interviews, which again are on the video platforms that haven't chucked us off yet. YouTube and Vimeo have, and Rumble we found to be unusable in the end, unfortunately, although there's not a censorship problem, and articles and blogs, which is more particularly the domain I'm covering as editor, article, blog, and podcast uploading. But for all of that, it's ukcolumn.org. That's your one-stop shop.
Oh, fantastic, Alex. Thanks ever so much. I really appreciate it. And to everyone who tuned in, thank you so much for coming and hopefully enjoying the podcast. Keep fighting the good fight. As we said, the roadshow for this ends now is well underway. So if anyone would like to help or in any way, shape, or form, either contact myself or Rich, or come into the INN channel and comment on one of the posts, is probably the easiest way to get in touch with us. But yeah, for anybody who wants to help, we'd really appreciate the help. But everyone, Alex Thomson, thank you so much. That was a wonderful podcast. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much indeed, and good night to you.
Thank you. You too, sir. Thanks.
Bye.
God bless.
Good night, sir.